Hello, and welcome to a guide on how to make eSports graphics. My name is Hugo, and I have made the graphics package that Riot uses for LCS Spring and Summer Split, as well as VCT Americas 23. My objective for this video is to help teach you and introduce you into the world of eSports graphics programming. This video will focus on making a PvP template. Template is what we call the scenes that go on the LED screens, because it is literally just that. A template is data-driven, or manually driven by an operator. For as data-driven as we may want to make our templates, operators will always be essential for queuing up our templates and bringing them to screen. Before we begin, I want to provide a disclaimer that normally you would get a layout with the final artistic vision, which makes it a lot easier to program a good-looking template. I'm a programmer, not an artist, so bear with me as I go through this with no preconceived layout. Alright, let's get started. If this is your first time working on your project, then you would be greeted with the screen where you would create your new project. I already have a project set up with some data I made using ChatGPT and Midjourney just so that we have some sample assets to work with. A link will be provided in the description below so you can access the same assets that I am using in this video. Now, opening my project, I could either load an existing scene or create a new one. Let's make a new one for this video. I'll make a folder with the appropriate name and throw it in there. File organization is very important, since for these type of projects you will find yourself programming for different outputs within the same project. I will be calling our root folder MW for main wall, as I do plan on showing how to program for different outputs in a separate video. Naming convention will change depending on projects. Our team tends to go by display underscore scene name underscore initials underscore version. However, I would recommend doing display underscore scene name underscore version underscore initials, since it can actually get annoying to sort on Windows when you have version number coming in last. It is important to have good naming convention and sticking with it. The reason we have version number in our files is because Ventuz does not support any undo features as of June 2023. I use Ventuz 6 for production level projects, but as far as I'm aware, even Ventuz 7 lacks that feature. This means that mistakes are costly, and thus, you want to be saving as often and making many versions. We'll be calling this scene MW underscore PvP underscore 001 underscore HV. Welcome to Ventuz. Now we can get started with the fun stuff. Since this tutorial is meant for absolute beginners, I will be taking my time and explaining every step of the way, and my reasoning for why things are done as well. The first thing you will ever drop into your projects will probably be the axis node. This node allows us to move, rotate, and scale all of its children nodes. As a child of the axis, you will set up your material node and rectangle node. Real quick, Ventuz will apply properties from left to right. That is why we have our axis, then material, then rectangle. Without our rectangle here, our material node has nowhere to render onto. The rectangle could easily be swapped for a circle or any kind of simple geometry. But to keep things simple, let's just stick with a rectangle. It's what I use in production anyway. The material node will default to the setting. For our purposes and general purposes of rendering a 2D image, you will change this to no light. That is pretty much the rule unless you're working in 3D and have proper lighting in your scene. I will add a texture loader here and pop it out to our content window. This bad boy is where you specify the file to be loaded, but you don't want to hard-code it and manually select the file from here. Instead, we want to create a simple solution that allows flexibility so that we can turn this into a modularly designed system. For that, we will create a string expression that ties into our data. Now, a quick cheat that I like to do while I make a string expression is to actually browse to where the asset is located and load it. I know I just said not to hard-code anything, but this is a surefire way to get the right formatting that Ventuz will accept for the file path. Let's just copy it and drop it into the A argument for our string expression. Now let's plug our path over to the string expression and nothing has changed. That's because we haven't done anything different yet. This is where things can start to vary. Ventuz allows you to collapse nodes into containers. So let's create our first container for our data. Containers allow us to keep our content view relatively clean. Let's begin by adding a few nodes. enum, string expression, text file, and JSON parser. Box select all of these and press Ctrl M or press right up here to collapse these to a container. Let's give it a friendly name that we'll understand and dive into it with middle click. Let's work left to right, although to be clear, it doesn't matter where you position things within your content view. Starting with our enum, let's call it teams. For this project, I have created 2 teams, Phoenix and TV. Let's add those as options into our enum as such. Let's expose our input so that we can select the team from outside of here. Next up, our string expression. Let's change the expression to A plus B plus C. Real quick, let's jump over A for a second. Grab B and drag it over to your enum and connect it to your input. This will grab whatever you have selected. For C, let's just type in .json. Onto our text file. Let's browse over to where we're storing our team data. In my case, I have placed it in the Assets Lineups folder, so that an operator can access it and modify it on the fly, if need be. I'll be selecting the tv.json file. Double-click the file text field and copy that path. Let's return to our string expression and paste that into A, but removing the tv.json from the end. Our string expression is now complete. Let's go back to our text file and grab our file and connect it over to the string expression. Now, when we change teams from the enum, it'll select and load different teams data files. Finally, to wrap up this container, let's finish it with the JSON parser. Simply drag this onto the txt file and press update. If we go over to our outputs for the JSON, we can now see our data structure appear. Let's expose these properties so that you can access them from outside our container. Jumping out of our container, we can now see how we can change teams, and the data that goes with it changes respectively. I've gone ahead and made an icon with Midjourney for this node, although it is unnecessary and completely optional. It's just nice to have to further make your node stand out when you're working on these projects and they get cluttered. Now we're ready to move on to our material. Let's start out with the player photo. Let's collapse this into a container as well and select interfacing in the properties panel. Let's call it player card and then middle click to dive into this container. Let's jump into our string expression and get rid of the player's name and file format within the A argument. Let's skip B for now and set up C to be .png. Don't forget to change your expression to be A plus B plus C. Let's add a JSON parser here and expose it. Let's hop out of our container real quick and plug it into the players array from our teams container. Jump back into the player card, select the JSON parser, and press update. Next, select your material in the hierarchy, and then select your string expression. Drag B so that it inherits from the name. Now, when we change the index of our JSON, we can change what player is being displayed. I don't know about you, but this player card is looking pretty damn ugly. Let's work on making it look better, shall we? There's a couple things that we're going to want here. Let's include a team logo above the player's head, and the player's name to the right of that. Below the player, let's include some basic stat fields. This should be a decent start for a player versus player template. Currently, our image is tiny, so let's make it a bit bigger. Let's do this by adding another axis. This will be our root. Let's go down to our scaling factor and bring that up to a 5. We'll keep our transforms at 0 for now. Next up, let's get the player name in here. Let's add a second axis and the text 2D child. Hold shift and click the material. This will bring up both in the content view. Within the content view, select the unnamed AA node, the source text, and scroll down to the text field and link it to the name from the JSON. We can now see our name is now big and overflowing on our screen. Let's ignore that for now. We'll be right back to fix that up. Instead of nesting our text inside the axis, we want one more node before it, the arrange node. After dragging it in, you will want to set the alignment to left chain. Let's add a color solid before our text as well. This is the same thing as setting no light for our material. Now, let's configure the logo. Quite simply, add another material and rectangle above our text like so. Just so we have some placeholder, let's select our logo. Pop out your texture loader to the content view. Now, as you can tell, these are not aligned. That's no problem. Now that we have our logo in here, we can go back to formatting the text. In the hierarchy, select the text. In content, select your AA node and look for the text alignment. Set this to center and our text is now aligned with our logo. Things are still too big and out of place though. Let's select our axis and set our x to be -0.85 and our y to 0.7, setting the scale factor to something like 0.25. While this may seem like sufficient formatting, there is still more we can do. To start off, our logo looks too small. Let's try bumping it up to be 2x2 on the rectangle. That looks better. Now, our player's name isn't always going to be that length, so how do we scale it accordingly? Thankfully, Ventuz has a pretty neat feature where you can insert a node called shrink to fit effect that we can shove between our text source and our text result. This will resize our text if it goes too far out of bounds. To see the bounds, press this here. Let's configure our bounds, shall we? 4.5 on the width and 1 on height looks good for now. We can always go back and change it as our design and project evolves. Before we move on from the header, let's handle the logic for the logo. After all, this design should be able to handle players from any team. Remember the logic we're using to change the player picture? It's a near identical process for the logo. Let's create our string expression, copy the path from our placeholder, paste it into A, and delete the logo.png. In this project, I actually have set up 3 variations of our logo. This is common to see for real projects, so I've included it in this one too. The common variations are solid, white, and outlined. There's a couple different ways to structure your paths, but I like to have them all in their own folders, bunching all the teams together according to their logo type or class. This adds a few extra steps to our expression, but it is nothing scary. A will remain the base path, B will be our logo class, and C will be the selected team. Let's expose C real quick and hook that up to our data, shall we? If we double click on the green box, we can actually rename our exposed parameter. Let's go ahead and call it try. This is because I've set up the logos to be called by the try codes. Let's back out one level and hook it up to our team's node's try codes. Then, jump back into the player card. Now, let's create an enum and populate it with solid, white, and outline as our options and hook up B to the input of the enum. Expose your input value, and that's that. Now hook it up to the material. While this is not necessary to do for this particular template, it is good to establish these type of practices. That way, you can plug it out and use it in another template without having to program a lot of extra stuff. This has virtually no cost on performance and might be recycled later on in the project. Lastly, let's not forget to expose the index of the JSON file as well to change our players. If we back out and change teams within the team node, we will see our graphics changing. We can also change the index and change the selected player with it. This is good, but we still have a bit to go before we can call it complete. Let's add a background to our player card. I want to subdivide it into 3 different sections. I want a background color for the header, photo background, and card background. Teams will normally have color schemes of their own, and it will be your responsibility to work that into your programming. Color operations can seem daunting, but it doesn't have to be. Let's start out with coming up with a simple black and white scheme and work off that. Some leagues will have a default color scheme and layout, and in which case you would use those colors and then work off those. Before adding colors, let's establish our shapes. Since we want to subdivide our card into these sections, let's take a look at how we can make it happen. Let's begin with the card background plate. Above my player photo material, I will add an axis and a rectangle. This rectangle will be 2x1 and set to the line Y top. Its axis will have a Y of 0.5 to offset things as well. Directly below that, I will place another set, with its Y-axis set to 0.5, but this time it will be a gradient rectangle. Let's make sure this one has a slightly smaller width than the original. How about 1.5 for X, and set the gradient to vertical. Also make sure that the alpha of 1 and 2 is set to 100. Now it's starting to look like something. Let's not forget about our header background. Let's add yet another axis and rectangle. We can give it a width of 2 and a height of 0.5 and make sure that it is below our photo BG in the hierarchy. This will place it in front of it. Give the axis a Y of 1 and you'll be set. I've decided I want a second background besides the main photo background. Bear with me. Click on your photo background axis, and while holding Control, drag it under itself. This will duplicate it. Set the one underneath to be 1.2 on the X and the one on top to be 1.9. Finally, we want somewhere for our stats to rest. So let's add a semi-transparent rectangle below everything. Let's add a final axis and rectangle. Our y-axis will be -0.5, our rectangle will be a line Y top. It'll be 2x1. Let's give it a material and set the color to black with an opacity of 0.25, and don't forget to set no light. If you're wondering where I got these numbers, I've done this a lot before and it's just trial and error. Eventually you just kind of get a feel for how to set this stuff up. I went ahead and came up with a neutral color scheme for this project that we can use to start off. Let's add some color solids to every rectangle that isn't the gradient rectangles. Now, we want to have the backplate at 56, 56, 56, the top gradient at 56, 56, 56, with the second one being 78, 78, 78, the bottom gradient, the first value being 127, 127, 127, and the second one being 193, 193, 193, and finally the header at 91, 91, 91. Already, this looks a lot better. I'll leave the color operations for another video and jump right into the stats. After that, we've essentially got our template 95% ready. Establishing this in the hierarchy correctly can seem daunting, but don't worry, it's actually pretty easy. Let's begin with an axis. Throw in a color solid, and then an arrange node. Make the arrange node be set to X left and Y top chain. Give the Y chain offset a Y of 0.05. Then, add a 2D text node and assign the text to be left. Align the text to center and the line to near. Add a shrink to fit effect with the properties for1. Label your arrange node labels. Duplicate it with Control and change the X align to be right. Name this one stats and give the text a value of right and set the line alignment to far. This is one of the many ways you can set up stats. This is what I'm opting for this template. All that is left for you to do is expose each text property. You can clone this as much as you want and expose those as well. Given our modular design, we have programmed not just for one player, but as many as you want in your scene. For this one, it'll be just one more player. Simply duplicate the player card container and you've got another player. Throw them inside an arrange node with the X chain set to center chain and with a slight offset, and you're set. The only remaining step is to turn this into a template that an operator can use via Ventuz Director. Operators can only see and mess with whatever you give them access through the template data. To get started with the final step, let's add a keyframe animation to our content view. Let's rename it to the scene name, select the data tab at the top right, and with the keyframe animation selected, drag its control property over to our scene data. Good. Now, let's go back to our Animate tab and start setting up our data. Before we start, let's do some renaming. The team container will have been cloned, so instead of having two containers called Team, let's name one Team A and one Team B. Same goes for the player card. Give them A and B, or 1 and 2, just be consistent. Add the labels and stats for the operator to fill out within the template data, as well as your index and your team select enum. And you're pretty much set. Once you've done it for both of them, you've got a template. Of course, we're missing many things that make these templates look good, such as the background, the color tinting, decorations, and fine details. However, with this, you should be able to create a bare bones basic template. I hope that this video has been helpful. I look forward to producing and making another one of these videos. Writing script, recording, and editing is very time consuming, so I honestly don't know when the next one will come out. If you're interested in keeping up, make sure you subscribe. Thank you.